All right. Well, wonderful and welcome to Mindset Monday, everybody. Today, I'm beyond thrilled to have a very special guest here today. Candace Wasacase has been one of my dearest friends and a longtime client. And in fact, I think that looking back, you were probably my first client. And
Probably.
we've had a friendship that has spanned over a decade now,
Yeah.
which is pretty crazy when you think about it. But
Yeah.
I'm extremely excited to have you here today and to speak with you and to have you speak to some of my clients and some of my friends. And Candace, for those of you who don't know her, okay, is a proud member of the Kakawistahau First Nation. Okay, she's an entrepreneur and an advocate, known nationally for sure, if not internationally. She was recently recognized by the Canadian Society of Landscape Architecture, which, if you're not familiar with, is a very distinguished award. She was recognized for her work with, most recently, it was the Gordon Oak Center in the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, but also the Wanuskewin Heritage Park. And you're actually an entrepreneur too, working on as a CEO on the Manitou Stone Building or Center in Alberta, and the lead for the new urban reserve project at the Kakawistahau Urban Reserve in Saskatoon. So welcome, Candace. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. I appreciate this. And I'm going to declare something right off the hop. That handsome guy in the other corner, not you, Matt, the other handsome guy is my brother. So I've never spoken in front of my own family before. It's better to speak in front of strangers. So this should be fun.
Right on. Hey, Troy. Hi, Tony.
We look nothing alike.
I don't know about that, but well, Candace, you and I have had countless great conversations about all sorts of topics. And it seems as though nothing is off the table when it comes to conversations between you and I. And one that we always kind of tend to gravitate back to is this idea of like spirituality, you know, and this belief in something that's greater than our own, or that's greater than ourselves, sorry. And I'm curious, you know, what role does spirituality play in your life? And how do you think it differs, or does it differ from what some people might think of when they're thinking of kind of like, you know, Judeo-Christian types of concepts of religion?
Yeah.
And maybe here, before I ask you this, I want to premise this with one thing that I'm really fascinated with is this idea that, you know, I've done this wellness wheel with a number of different people. Some of you guys are probably familiar with this wellness wheel. And when I do this with quote unquote white people or Caucasian people, you know, when we identify the different aspects of our full and, you know, fulfilling life, spirituality is one of the last things that's ever mentioned, if at all. And what I've observed with my work with some of the indigenous groups that I work with is it's usually one of the top things that's mentioned. And it's very like, you know, enlightening for me, but it's just a, you know, great observation to see, you know, the role that that plays in indigenous life. And so that's kind of where that question comes from.
Yeah. You know, I get that, Matt, and you and I have had lots of conversations, and I'm actually going to start with a quick story that's going to embarrass you just a little bit, because I do believe people are brought into our world for a variety of reasons. So, you know, I'm a Cree person from southern Saskatchewan, Treaty 4. I'm from the Kakawistahau First Nation. My mother's Ukrainian, my father's Cree, so I kind of grew up with a bit of a duality. It's that whole idea of being able to see out of both your eyes. And I take great sort of pride in that. And I think it helps form and shape who I am. And, you know, just my relationships around me, my work, you know, it makes a difference to me that I have sort of a different understanding. And I think that different understanding, which might have been, you know, as a younger person, sort of wrought with sort of self-doubt, creeped in with some racism, and, you know, has really become a strength. And I like to work from a place of strength. It was over 10 years ago, I was significantly overweight, and I was in a health food store trying to find another magic pill, right? I don't know if you've been there, but I was looking for sort of a quick fix solution. And I remember I was standing at the end of this line, and I'm looking through all these different medicines, and I heard the jing jing of the door of someone coming in, and it was a young man speaking to the lady at the front counter. And he said, I'm a new personal trainer. I just moved back to Saskatoon. Can I leave a flyer with you? And she was quite rude to him from what I remember. And I remember that voice caught my ear. I was like, oh, that's bad. And so I can hear him. He says, thank you. And he starts to leave. And I remember thinking right at that moment, I have tried everything. I've never asked for help. I've never asked for a mentor. I've never asked for a guide. And so I turned around and I said, I'd like to hear more. And I think I scared him. I think I scared Matt. There he was. And we walked out into the parking lot in Stonebridge in Saskatoon. And I think we stood in that parking lot for over an hour talking about health, nutrition, wellness, connection to people, connection to ourselves, mental health. He was a complete stranger on the street to me, but I knew in that moment that this person was different. This person had something that I needed. I was ready to think differently. And I think that formed the basis of our friendship all these years, is there's always something to learn. There's always something to explore. And spirituality in that realm has really sort of dominated our relationship in the last maybe few years. Matt has recently not only helped me sort of get back in shape physically, but he helped me leave a job that I've held for over 22 years because it was something that I wanted to do better in my life. And so there's always some place to grow. Instead of saying there's always some place to go, there's always some place to grow. And I think with the help of good friends, good family, boundary pushing, spirituality is a part of that. So I wanted to just sort of start by acknowledging Matt's role in my life. And it's been incredible. So thank you.
Wow. The feeling is mutual, my friend. I think we hit it off right from the start. And, like you said, touched on things like philosophy and ideology. And, we had an instant connection. And it's been something special over the years. So I'm incredibly grateful for you too, my friend.
Yeah. You asked me a little bit about the role spirituality plays in my life. And it's actually not something that I think about. It's something that is just a way of being. It's just a way of sort of walking through the world. I've over the years, of course, you study and you read and you look things up, but I think there's something very innate amongst Indigenous people, that connection to land, to spirit, and to our ancestors. So we always sort of know that we're sort of surrounded with that. We are living a certain life, we're walking a certain path, and we have to uplift others as we go. That's one of the foundational principles of Indigenous life, is to uplift everyone around you. Like, your job is to become that ancestor that your children and your grandchildren will be proud of. And you become that guider in the spirit world. And I know that may sound a little sort of out there and a little bit hokey, but it's really just when you live the 7 grandfathers' teachings. And I can put a little, I don't know if there's a chat function on this, but I can post sort of a link to a website that can go a little deeper into the teachings. But it talks about, these foundational laws of our lives. And when you live in a good way, you're living from a place of love, respect, courage, truth, honesty. Humility is huge for us, and wisdom. And if you can live and guide yourself in those principles, the spirituality takes care of itself. So it's sort of an essence. It's hard to describe. And so some people always ask, well, what's the difference between that and a religion? Well, to me, when you think of religion, and everyone, my father used to always say, I don't care what you believe, as long as you believe in something. I have to know that something grounds you, no matter what that is, whatever you need to pray to. If it grounds you, then, and that's an openness and a respect for any other sort of cultural or religious or practices that comes along with it. I mean, if it kind of grounds you in those fundamental good way of life, then that's the essence of sort of Indigenous spirituality.
Yeah, you know what? I love that. And I think that that's very wise. Was it your father that said that? Yeah. I don't care what you believe in, just so long as you believe in something. Yeah. And I think that, the power for me in that comes from, believing in something that's greater than myself. And I think that right now there's a lot of conversation around the world and, to our neighbors to the south about like rights and individual freedoms and things like that, but not as much about respect or responsibility And I think
Yes.
that when you start to talk about some of those sorts of things, it's like it makes life more than just about what's in it for you. And
Yeah.
it becomes more of a question of, okay, well, how can I be of service, or how can I help, or what's out there that I can provide for others? And that
Yeah.
shifts the dialogue, and that's a totally different game, in my opinion.
Yeah. Troy and I both live in Confed Park here in Saskatoon, or I'm just outside the neighborhood. I'm just across the road in Massey Place. I'm just going to ask the other people on the line, are you from Canada? Like, I don't know where you're from. You're from Canada? Okay. Are you, Aaron?
Aaron's from the States.
Okay, so this may not make a lot of sense to an American because I'm talking about a past political leader in Canada. So the very first Prime Minister of Canada was a man named John A. Macdonald. And John A. Macdonald had the job of sort of opening up the West. And so when the newcomers first came to this land, of course, it was about addressing Indigenous peoples in all over the country. He was the architect for something that decimated Indigenous people, which was called the residential school system. So I only mention this because John A. Macdonald is a street in Saskatoon in Confed Park, a neighborhood that came up in the 1960s and the 1970s here in Saskatoon. And we recently took on a process to rename that road. And a lot of people, and then this actually, a lot of the stories did come up from the States around taking down various statues, taking on, taking on different, issues that were harming people. And so I'm telling you this because there is a concept, and we renamed the road Mio Wakotowin. And Wakotowin is a pretty famous word here in Saskatoon now, and it's a Cree word, and it literally means to be in good relations or to be connected. But it goes beyond that. It goes to the responsibility we have to one another as peoples, right? And so we're renaming a road to take away something that really was harmful to the development and the growth of Indigenous spirituality, and really quite something that, the phrase that John A. Macdonald is so famous for is to kill the Indian and the child, right? And to kill the essence of our spirituality is what happened through residential schools. So these concepts are universal. And it's my quest in life to share concepts that all people, Indigenous and non, can feel a part of those, and they're useful and add value to your life. So when you think about that, think about Wakotowin, in good relations and keeping in good relations, staying connected, but ultimately responsibility to each other. And that's what the Seven Grandfathers teachings do for us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And here's the thing, is that so oftentimes we kind of forget that responsibility to others. And when you're talking about, like, bringing that back, or breathing some life into that concept again, and bringing that front of mind to people, I think that's so important. And I run a program that's called Momentum Mastermind. And recently we've been talking a lot about kind of, different things like spirituality and connection to the universe, and, just a concept that's greater than us. And I find that to be incredibly empowering, because it makes me feel connected. It makes me feel like a part of something greater. And it's actually very, like, inspiring. And to your point there that you said, what was the phrase that you used to, kill the Indian and the child?
Yeah, that was an old concept in Canada with our very first prime minister, and it was sort of a big assimilation policy. And it worked assimilation didn't work. What I meant is the harmful effects of attempting this has been detrimental to the evolution of Indigenous spirituality and some of the problems that we're seeing today.
Well, I can totally see how cutting somebody off from their spirituality, when you make it illegal to practice your cultural or spiritual practices, and you make it illegal to speak your own language, what that does to remove any sense of I'm not sure, maybe remove isn't the right word, but you certainly undermine people's power and sense of identity, and people's sense of spirituality. And I can see how returning some of that would be hugely empowering.
And honestly, I've been to a lot of presentations where there's almost shaming of other people, like othering people. And I know how crappy that feels. So I would never want to do that to someone else. So I'm really hoping that we can find a way to position Indigenous spirituality to help all people, that this is
Right.
accessible to all people, that there are some of the work that I shared with you in preparation for this session was some work by a man named Wilfred Buck, and
Right.
YouTube him. He's incredible. He's an indigenous Western Plains, I guess, indigenous person, and he studies the stars. He studies constellations, and he does a lot of teachings around what the constellations mean from an indigenous perspective. So we all look at the stars. The stars
Right.
don't change for anybody.
I love that.
and I find that really inspiring. So I mean, he does stories around, the creation story and how we came to be as people, and the elements of these stories are the same all over the world.
Isn't that
so
true?
That's what Yeah, so I fundamentally believe that our spirituality was kind of hidden or outlawed or abandoned, or made shameful for so long, that as we bring them back, and there's so many young people today re-embracing their language, re-embracing their culture, that we can do it in a way that we can share it with the world,
Right.
and in a healthy way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the most interesting things for me is just how indigenous cultures and how ancient wisdom was aware of so many things way before scientists came along to prove it. And I think that oftentimes, science and spirituality seem to be in conflict, but I don't necessarily see that as the case. I think that now what we're experiencing is science is just, proving what a lot of times spirituality has been saying for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite books is it's a book called The Wayfinders. And
I know that book. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's written by Wade Davis, and he talks about different ancient wisdom from indigenous cultures around the world, from including the Polynesians and the Plain Cree and the Aborigines in Australia and things like that, where they use their knowledge of the natural world around them to survive and thrive for thousands of years. And I just find that sort of thing is fascinating. But I was going to mention, you shared an insight with me a number of years ago that I didn't quite fully understand at the time. But you said a long time ago, you told me that we're made of the stuff of the moon and the stars. Is that right? Is that something to that effect?
Yeah. So even at a cellular level inside our body, we have minerals, we have, we all have different vibrations and frequencies, and the same sort of structures that you find in the universe, the same kind of materials that you find in the stars, you find in our bodies. And that directly relates to Sky Woman, which is the story of a woman who fell from the sky and became Mother Earth, right? And so that's, I mean, it's a big, long story that I would never have time to tell you, and I don't even know it well enough to share it with any kind of integrity. But it's this whole idea that it's that interconnectedness, that we are part of the universe, right? And that we are here on Earth, and that's what binds us. And so it actually makes you, like you'd said, Matt, really make you feel connected to every other being, whether it be an animal, plant, or a rock, or other human beings. Like there's an interconnectedness and that responsibility. That's why that teaching of Wakodawan is so critical.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And like you said, the minerals that show up in our bodies show up in the same, exactly what you're saying, in the stars, in the sun, and in the moon. And I think that when you look at our bodies, like we're made up of mostly hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. And it's the exact same things that make up all of the things in our solar system. And like we are a part of all of it. And I think that one of the biggest disservices that we've done is, we've idolized the individual, and we see ourselves as separate and apart rather than a piece of the whole. And that I think is really damaging to ourselves as human beings, but also maybe even, the population in general.
Well, and I think COVID was a really big wake up call for all of us, is that we can't survive in isolation. Like there's so many traumas that have happened through COVID that we're now trying to work and live through, and our kids lived through isolation, and that had a big damaging effect on them. I think we all sort of realized the appreciation for each other a little bit more, and that we can't survive in isolation.
Yeah, we can't do it on our own.
No.
Yeah, in isolation, that's a good point. And, I was thinking about this the other day, in the sense that one of the worst things that you can do if you're looking at like the prison population, is to put somebody in, isolation and
Mm-hmm.
remove them from other people and that sort of thing. It's like we need
Yeah.
that human connection, don't we?
Yeah,
It's
we
such
sure
an
do.
important part of our life. But
Mm-hmm.
let me ask you, why do you think it's so important to understand where we come from and our histories, and how does it
Yeah.
inform kind of who we are?
Well, I think there's a certain confidence in understanding exactly where you come from, who your people are, what grounds you, who walks with you. And I was talking about the ancestors earlier. So for many years, I ran a student center at the University of Saskatchewan.
Right,
And I would find students, anybody between the ages of 18 and 24 coming to university, are in whatever cultural background you're from, you're kind of coming into your own for the first time. Right.
right.
And, you're exploring different ideas. You are coming up with who you are outside of your parents. And so I'd see a lot of young and particularly Indigenous people come through the center that I was working at. And those who were really grounded in their identity and had cultural confidence
Yeah.
were much more successful in the classroom, right? When those sort of foundational pieces were in place and they could stand with a sense of pride and dignity and cultural strength, the rest of the things, I didn't have to hire as many math tutors or writing tutors because they had that sort of confidence coming in. And
Mm.
those who didn't, we did everything in our power to help in a judgment-free environment, help people establish who they were, help them get connected with their communities. And, lots of Indigenous people were separated from families from birth, right? And
Mm.
that's, so again, residential schools or the 60s scoops or just modern day child and family services, Indigenous kids are often taken from homes, right? So it's really creating a space for young people in particular, but at any age, if you needed to be grounded in who you are, you're going to get a benefit from that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, that actually speaks to a lot of the work that I do as far as kind of like
Mhm.
identity.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I talk about a lot is identity-based change. And one of the most powerful forces in human nature is this idea or this desire to remain consistent with our beliefs about who we think we are, even on an unconscious or an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes if you're not sure of who you are, or if, you haven't, been encouraged to be yourself, or you're
Yeah.
trying to be something that you're not, that can be a real damning situation to find yourself in, can't it?
Yeah, and it's very, very harmful, especially if you live in denial on who you truly are, your true essence. It catches up with you eventually, and I think that's sort of the root of whether it be self-destructive behavior or addictions or anything like that, is that sort of
Right?
lack of grounding. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, how does storytelling contribute to, either a sense of identity or to used as a tool to inform and
Mm.
inspire people?
Yeah, we love to tell stories, don't we? And I think it's just such a powerful tool for communication. It's like, reading, you can read a textbook for sure, but when you can sort of sit down and really listen to somebody and really listen to their story. I watched this video, I think I'm not sure if it's a TED Talk or not, but it was definitely online. And it was how to be a better story listener. How do you understand what your
Mm,
parents are really telling you? And a lot of times I found this in the school system when my boys were small. Um, as a parent, I'm not super directive, right? I
mm,
will, and I think a lot of Indigenous parents are like this. I know most of my friends are like this. You try and live by a certain example, or you try and convey a certain emotion in a story that informs your child.
right.
And I do have one story. I wasn't sure if I was going to tell, and I'll keep it brief. You know, when I was a little kid, when I was not, I was probably about 13 years old. I lived alone with my dad on the reserve, and we lived in this house with no running water and no electricity, and it was like January, so it was cold. And I got off the bus that day, and it was January. So you know how it gets dark real early in January. And my dad wasn't home and the fire wasn't lit in the stove. And so the house was like a frozen rock. And I had to build a fire. I had to take everything that my dad, my mom, anyone in my family had ever taught me about building a fire. Because the challenge was I searched the house for a book of matches and I
Mm,
found one book of matches and it had one match. And I knew that if I struck that match without it being completely prepared, and if I didn't have the patience and the confidence and the resilience to take everything I'd ever learned, build that fire, and do it before it's completely dark, or I'm going to be really in trouble, that the whole weekend would go by and I'd probably freeze. I don't know what would have happened to me. And so I remember I got home about 4:30, and I had till about 5:30 before it was completely dark to build this thing. And I was young and I was scared, right? And so suddenly all the listening of the stories and the observing of building fire, everything came to me all at once. And I did everything in my power. And then I struck that match. And then I even realized how many matches had I actually struck at this time. What if it didn't work? And it lit. And I quickly got it underneath, and it caught slowly. And then the rest of the weekend I spent chopping wood and keeping that fire going. But I'll never forget that it felt like everything I'd ever been taught came down to that one moment. And if I didn't pull that off, I don't know where I'd be right now. I really don't. So yeah, being a good story listener, honoring the observing your elders, your parents, your teachings, and because those are the things that will save you. Those are the things that will get you at your darkest hour and help you.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful story of strength and resilience, and one that I'm sure can serve you for a very long time. But I find this so interesting, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but sometimes I find like our minds are little meaning making machines. And we'll have an event that happens, and then we get to kind of the opportunity to process it and create a narrative or a story around what that occasion or what that event meant, right? And we can either choose to make it an empowering story, or we can choose to make it a story around being either less than, or a hurt, or a victim, or whatever that might look like for that particular thing. And I find that one of the things that I've learned is that we shape our stories, but our stories also have a tendency to shape us, don't they?
Absolutely.
And I can only imagine the strength that you've gained from that story and that event, and looking back how much of a pivotal moment that must have been in your life too.
Well, I'm sure at the moment there was nothing philosophical about it. It was so practical.
Right.
Of course, 30 years, 40 years later, of course I can be all, but at the time it wasn't. But I've shared that story with my boys, and usually that story would come up when we'd be camping or doing something outdoors, and I tell them, what if you had only had one match to start this fire? Right. And we recently, and Troy knows this story, but we recently had an incident here in Saskatoon. My son works in downtown Saskatoon, and it's expensive to park downtown, so he always takes the bus. And he was attacked by 7 non-Indigenous young people, and 4 of them were picked up. But he was beaten up. He's got a fractured bone in his cheek, and this happened 5 days ago. But the most horrifying part is that they held him down and sprayed him with spray paint. Red spray paint all over his neck, all over his face, in his hair. And it was absolutely terrifying. But in that moment, he knew how to protect himself. And he had a very clear head about it. And he took care of himself. And he just had such resilience in that moment that I'm so proud of him. Like, it terrifies me, honestly. And it is his parents' worst nightmare. But I'm so proud of him. And so these stories matter. And he's going to tell his story about strength and resiliency and staying calm and knowing what to do. And yeah, when we got to him, he was a mess, of course. But in the moment, I remember he phoned me. And I had to dig deep and not react, not make wrong decisions in this moment. You only have a couple of moments right now, and you got to make the right decisions. You got to protect your child. He's got to protect himself. So, and he was scared, and he was alone in the middle of the street, So, yeah.
Well, you and I have talked briefly about that, and I think that that's one of the hardest things to do as a parent.
Yeah.
to watch
Yeah.
your child endure something like that. And
Yeah.
you know, as a parent, you want to do everything that you can to protect them all the time. And the truth is that that's just not a
Yeah.
reality, is it?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I always taught my son to, you know, not fight, be of peace. But I'm glad he had the physical confidence to hold his ground and protect himself, you know. So what did
Yeah.
Bruce Lee say? It's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in a warrior. or
Yeah, then a gardener in a
a
war.
gardener in a war.
Yeah,
I just read
100%.
that the other day and I went, yeah, that makes sense to me now.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
know, I see a tremendous amount of value in learning life skills like
Yeah.
self-defense,
Yeah.
you know, and things like that that, you know, will serve you, not only creating the discipline and the, you know, perseverance and the respect in you, but also the ability to defend yourself in situations like that.
Yeah.
Because yeah, you just never know when, you know, situations like that arise,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
Okay.
I know that in the past you've been a huge proponent of tools and practices like
Mhm.
visualizations and meditation. And you and I have
Yeah.
had some conversations about, you know, growing up and how you utilized, you know, just the power of dreaming and dreaming big to
Yeah.
help you get to where you are today. So, can you tell me a little bit about, you know, where you
Yeah.
learned that and what that looks like for you?
Yeah. Well, that I give full credit to my mom. When I was really little, I used to have really bad dreams. And I remember she'd put me to bed at night and she would make me tell her a story instead of her telling me a story.
Mm.
And she'd make me retell a beautiful memory back to her. And my mom was right into creative visualization. I remember in the 80s, she had all these books on this. And when I was little, I started having this little fantasy in my head. And here's a kid, I was living on the reserve. We had like no money, we had no electricity or running water. Right? But I dreamt every night that I worked in this beautiful place and I had on a beautiful clothes and I was doing something really important and I'd be working away in my office and the phone would ring and the person on the other line would say, Candace, your mom's here to take you for lunch. I dreamt that dream for probably 10 years. And I remember the day it happened. I was working downtown at the Avery Tower and I had my first big job out of university. And the front receptionist phoned me and she said, your mom's here to pick you up for lunch. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I'll never forget. So, I mean, I always dreamed that I needed to contribute something and I needed to feel that my experience and, you know, reserve life, all of that really meant something, that it was worthy in the bigger world. And I don't know if I've ever really articulated it that way before, but yeah. So visualization, absolutely. Like, and then it's actually kind of a challenge. Okay, so what's my new dream?
Yeah,
What do I dream of now?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you come in.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes I find that, you know, visualization works so well, but you know, then you get to a
Yeah,
certain point where it's like you said, okay, well, you know, sometimes our reality, you know, is
yeah,
even beyond the scope of our imagination to a certain extent. And
yeah.
I know that, you know, there have been times in my life where I've looked around and I thought, man, I could not have ever imagined it being this good. You
No,
know, as much as I try, it's like, you know, and for
yeah,
that I'm grateful. But
yeah,
you're doing some really exciting work and some really
yeah.
interesting work in Alberta right now. And
Sure.
tell me, what's the significance of the Manitou Stone? What is it, and why
Mhm.
is it that important right now?
Well, it's kind of interesting because we're going to go right back to where we began, where we begin with the universe and we talk about the stars. So the
Right.
Manitou stone is actually about a 350-pound iron meteorite that fell from the sky. And it fell in southern, what is now known as southern Alberta. And, you know, generations, hundreds of years ago, it was the central gathering place for the northern tribes. So whether you were Cree, Dene, or Blackfoot, they would meet at this stone 4 times a year. And this is prior to any of the newcomers coming to Canada. There's only Indigenous people on the land. So I don't even remember this. Let's think about like 300 years ago.
Sure.
And so, you know, even as societies, we would often war or fight over territory. That's just what things happened. But 4 times a year, they would come to the stone and they would pray together. And when you were in the presence of the stone, you could only speak about healing, health, prosperity of your community. And it became the central part of Indigenous spirituality. The stone was the God stone. It's called the Manitou stone, which of course means God. And it was God coming to earth. And that's what the stone, and it has a vibration. It's an incredible piece of iron meteorite to be in the presence of it. Around 1850, 1860s, when Canada was being opened up to the newcomers, the missionaries, of course, were coming out and spreading, Christianity, and nothing against Christianity, not at all. They were coming out to educate people, right?
Right.
And the stone was a barrier. So since the stone was part of Indigenous spirituality, the stone was a barrier to Christianity. So they took the stone. And it was lost to Indigenous people for 150 years. It kind of wandered around Eastern Canada, different locations. And it was always the prophecy that if the stone was ever taken or removed, or if we ever lost the stone, it was more like if we ever lost it, we would lose the buffalo and the tribes would go to war. And think about all the horrible things that have happened since that time. The breakdown of Indigenous culture and spirituality. So the stone was actually taken to the Royal Alberta Museum about 15 years ago. And so my job as the CEO of the Manitou Stone Center is to repatriate that stone back to the land and back to the Blackfoot, the Cree, and the Dene. And we are building a facility in southern Alberta, very close to where the rock originally was taken from, and to create a new home to revitalize Indigenous spirituality and culture. And I'm serious, this needs to be for everyone. The power of the stone is, of course, it's the center of our spirituality, but it should have a positive impact on Canada. And I think it's Canada's biggest reconciliation project, because when you think about everything that happened when the stone was removed, the restoration of that stone symbolizes the reclamation.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm completely honored that my life brought me to a place where I get to work on something as amazing as this.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I love that. And, I can absolutely get on board with this idea of, the vibration and the energy of an artifact like that.
Yeah.
And, you and I have had lots of conversations and taken walks out in nature and things like that. And, my office, I look around my office and my bedroom and my living room are full with like beach stones. And every time I go down to the ocean or for a walk, I always come home with a couple in my pocket and that kind of thing. And I can only imagine the energy around an artifact or like a stone, like you're speaking about there, the Manitou stone. And I can see why it would bring people together and provide, that sense of it for them.
I just realized something that, remember when I came out to visit you a couple years ago?
Yeah.
And we went to that cool beach with all the black stones.
Yeah.
And I picked one up and I took it home with me. And and the next year was a complete year of change for me. I'm going to lose my job. I'm either going to leave or they're going to fire me. One of the two things are going to happen. And I held on to that stone. And every time we had our session, I held on to that stone. And then I came back. When did I come back? When was I there last time?
And maybe a year ago in Vancouver.
Was it not this past spring?
Yeah, maybe this spring, maybe
it was this past spring.
May,
and I brought the rock back to you.
Yeah.
And I told you to go return it back there, because that whole year of yuckiness and pain and change that me and my rock lived through, we got through it. And we did change our lives. We did change everything we wanted to do. And I gave you that rock back. And so I hope you just didn't toss it out your car window.
No.
I hope you actually did return it. But
No, I did.
That held that energy, and and to be able to re-release it, it's powerful. I just figured that out while we were sitting here. It's like, and now I'm working with the stone. It's cool.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. And just to put your mind at ease here, I didn't just toss it on on the drive home. I actually went down to French Beach where we picked it up, and I had a moment there, and then hurled it into the waves, returned it to its rightful resting place.
Awesome. Thank you. This has been a joy. If anybody had any questions, I'd be free to answer them, but I also know I'm probably taking over your time and I don't want to do that for you either. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Does anybody I see the chat's been blowing up a little bit here.
Oh, really? I didn't look at that. Let me see.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, neat. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe one more question here before I let you run. And then if anybody else has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or throw it in the chat and we can get to it in a second. But I'm curious to hear, what is your opinion or what's your vision for, Indigenous-led leadership, and how do you
Oh,
integrate that into the economy,
yeah,
into entrepreneurship, into
yeah.
business today?
Well, we happen to have an Indigenous entrepreneur right on the line here today with Troy and his collective car dealing. So if you're in Saskatoon and Jakarta, and see my brother, uh,
Right.
but you know, to me, what we talked about earlier around sort of non-direct, but being a servant leader that lives, role models the behavior they want to see. To honor and uplift voice. I'll go back to that. Whenever, even I was in a staff meeting this morning with my Manitou Stone Center team, and I'm always the last, like, I never speak my opinion until I've heard everybody else's. And so it's to me, it's just a respectful way of being, to honor the person. It's like, you see that in Covey, you listen to learn, not listen to win.
Right.
That's important of it. When it comes to Indigenous business, support Indigenous business owners. Honestly, support local anywhere you are. Reach out. Money's green. Everybody's
Right.
money's green, and so I don't know. I would just say, if you have any biases, find a safe place to examine them, because I know
Mm.
I have biases. Absolutely. If you, yeah, reach out, because someone will reach back. I always sort of say, I'm not going to do to other people what other people have done to me. It's just not going to be. I know what it's like to live in a world of cruelty, but I would never do that. So if a non-Indigenous person comes to me and wants help, I'm always there, always. Yeah.
That's one thing that I've always respected and admired about Indigenous culture, is just how much they respect each other, one another, and nature. And I think it's one of those things that, divided we fall, but together
Mm.
we rise type of thing. And there we have so much more strength and so much
Yeah.
more power as a collective. I've always appreciated that about Indigenous culture. But I see Aaron has a question. Yes, Aaron, go ahead.
Hi,
Hey, wonderful story, very inspirational. I love what you're doing. It's truly amazing.
No, I appreciate you.
Um, my question is, what advice would you give to
Mm.
um anyone that's outside the indigenous like tribes, like learning about the culture?
Yeah.
What's the biggest takeaway that you would want them to know, like when it comes to like a spiritual meaning, like
Mm.
the feeling of the culture?
Yeah. I think that word resilience, I think it means the same for everyone. Everyone's had to triumph. But to recognize that, I was talking, a group of Americans came up to see the Gordon Oak Center shortly after it was built. And one of them said, what we do with our Indians in the States, we just ignore them. Oh my. But so, but if that's sort of what everybody's taught, um, a wall is up. And
Mhm.
so have the courage to be vulnerable with things that you don't know about Indigenous people, and take the time to learn. Like, I've spent a lifetime walking in sort of duality here, and I wouldn't consider myself an expert in anyone's particular culture. We're always learning, but it's having the courage to learn. So I'm going to post in the chat here. I'm going to cut and paste the 7 grandfathers teachings. It's a great place to start, and internalize it to what you already have going for yourself. And there's a lot of already common truths that we can build on together. I appreciate you, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Any other questions or comments? Anything just while Candace is sharing this in this group chat?
Yeah, as you can tell, I don't know what I'm doing. Here we go. There we go.
I'll make this available too in our group chat if anybody isn't able to catch this or capture this right now. Well, Candace, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here and speak with us today. It's always an honor to connect with you, and I'm always inspired every time we speak. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for being you. You know, you bring a special energy and a special light to not only our conversations, but to everybody that you come into contact with. And, you know, you taught me a long time ago the power and the importance of being a pebble in each other's ponds. And you just never know the ripple effect the showing up with that kind of attitude and that kind of energy can bring to the people nearest you, but wide and far as well. And so from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you for being here today. And as always, I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thank you for being my friend. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. I appreciate this.
Okay. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everybody. Talk soon.